But these people have the power to hit back. And they are going to hit back with all the skill of their hands, the tradition of their crafts, and the fire in their hearts. Out of the valleys of power and the rivers of industry will come the answer to the German challenge. And the Nazis will learn, once and for all, that no one with impunity troubles the heart of Britain.
The idea, okay? Fabulous movie. There are loads of those, and you can watch most of them online. There's a really great other one called Listen to Britain, also done by Humphrey Jennings, which is about 15 minutes long, and I didn't really have time to show it to you today. So where is the heart of Britain? This movie is called The Heart of Britain. What's he portraying as the new heart of Britain? The people, but where are they? They're working people, yeah, absolutely. Where are they geographically, Charlotte? Right. So it's the northern industrial areas, you know, that have been the distressed areas of high unemployment, the places that were seen to be the politically most dangerous and economically most backward in the 30s, now become the very heart of Britain. And how does this look like the documentary movies that we saw last week? What's the connection to the documentary movement? Okay, it's obviously industrial workers are the subject, like those old documentary movies. What else? It's the other way in which it feels like a documentary. Say that again. They interview individuals, and they're real people. Okay, that's absolutely true. It's they're real people, but almost invariably you see people doing things collectively, don't you? People are singing collectively. They're playing. What's that game where you run around and you take away one of the chairs? They're playing that collectively. They're doing air raid rescue work all together. They're building the planes, that will go and bomb Germany together. Okay, so there's a real sense in which these types of films build the sense of community and the sense of common purpose that was so important. And lastly, of course, it's a deeply gendered view of what the British people were. Okay. It's in that last line, or one of the last lines, when he goes, "People like these," and then he, that can sing like that, cannot be defeated. And then he goes, tell their wives, their mates, their children. The subject, of the voiceover is basically male, even though women get to do those very important jobs like making cups of tea and all the rest of it. It's essentially about the British people as a male group of people. My point that you need to get, though, is that these types of films, this type of propaganda, the type of stuff going on in the Ministry of Information and the BBC, came out of the very leftist cultural projects of the 1930s. Okay, So the people that were, again, on the cultural outside, on the margins, part of the avant-garde in the 20s and 30s, now had real significant influence in the central institutions of the state. Okay, so how is this a people's war? As I said, the essential representation of it was of these binding phrases of equality of sacrifice and fair shares for all. There was an implied sense of universality, that everyone was going to be the same. And yet, there were very important differences. Okay? So I spent most of this semester talking to you about the way in which liberalism projected a sense of its universal reach, its application to all people and to all groups, and how it always came up short, how it always singled out specific groups as not being quite ready, not being quite able to do it. Here we have the next big political system, which I'm describing to you as social democracy, making the same type of claims, that it has a universal reach and applicability to everybody, and we're going to see over the course of the next few weeks that it too is compromised, because it actually ends up treating people very differently. And the war is probably the first illustration of that. And I'm going to try and demonstrate this by talking about rationing, the Blitz, evacuation, and the issue of race and empire. And I might drop one of them if we run out of time, because I've got another film I want to show you. Rationing. Remember, in the First World War, they don't introduce rationing until basically the last few months, and it's William Beveridge who does it. In the Second World War, they introduced rationing immediately in August 1939. They put Lord Walton in charge. Lord Walton is actually a Conservative member of Parliament, but he becomes responsible for developing a rationing system that promised to give fair shares to everybody. Okay, that was the founding principle of rationing, that everyone, that would be a universal basis of rationing, that everybody would have access to the same rations. And if you watch that delightful informational film that I put online explaining the rationing system, you'll understand that there were different types of rationing. There was a universal point scheme, and then there was a universal set of rations. That is to say that you got certain things. Only bread was unrationed. You could get as much bread as you wanted. Okay? But things like butter and sugar and I'm trying to think of other examples. Bacon, I think, were all, you had a certain amount that you could get, an absolute amount, like a limited amount that you could get every week, depending on how many people in your household. And then you had a point system that you could save up certain points if you wanted to get a tin of tinned pineapple, or you wanted to buy some extra powdered egg because someone in your family had a birthday and you wanted to make a cake for them. The point is that everybody had the same basic sets of rations. Although not quite, because, and I'm going to be jumping around a bit here, not quite because certain categories of people were given extra rations. If you were a heavy industrial worker, you got more food because you needed more nutritional intake. If you're a pregnant mother or a young child, you got a special set of rations. The other thing, of course, that the rations couldn't deal with was the fact that if you had money, you could buy things on the black market. Okay? So there were lots of goods that were unrationed. Caviar, for instance, to give you an obvious example, was not rationed. Okay? So if you had plenty of money and a taste for caviar, you were well set. Okay? Similarly, you could go and eat out in restaurants as often as you liked. Okay? Restaurants were subjected to some rationing, but effectively the fancy restaurants in London stayed open throughout the war. And it depended very much upon where you lived. If you lived in the countryside and you could trap the odd rabbit, or you could go and pick blackberries, or you could grow your own vegetables, or pick your own apples from your neighbour's garden, then you were set. Okay? If you lived in the cities, you really didn't have access to those types of additional resources. The other accident of geography in terms of the rationing system was that rationing was confined to Britain alone. Okay? The empire was not on a rationing system. Indeed, many people would say that the rationing system in Britain was supported by the agricultural produce of the empire. Okay? And the best illustration, the most powerful illustration of the different standards applied in rationing in terms of Britain and its empire was the catastrophic famine that broke out in Bengal in 1943 that killed millions of people, and to which the government of India seemed completely blind to until it was upon them. So rationing was fair shares for all, but it wasn't quite fair shares. Another point that I want to make, two other points that I want to make here. Rationing put women in the front line of the war effort. Okay, the kitchen front, as it became known, made women's management of food resources and of domestic resources a critical part of the war effort. And here you see that whole trajectory of domestic science and household economy that they had been taught since the late 19th century really came home here. Okay, there was a way in which rationing taught women the very skills that the domestic scientists have been trying to do for years. Everybody had a ration book. Everybody had to plan out their weekly budget and fare for their family. The other point is that the government tries to develop new types of communal eating. Okay? And here the emphasis again was on building a sense of community. Okay? So there were a whole bunch of new communal restaurants, not just in works canteens, as in the First World War, but now outside of the work environment. Things called British restaurants. Can you imagine such a ghastly phenomena as something as a British restaurant? But Churchill thought the British restaurant would really catch on. And they set up a whole series of them across the country in order that people could go and eat cheaply, and that they could form a new type of communal eating experience. There were over 2,000 of them by 1943. Okay, so that's rationing. What about bombing? What about the Blitz? Again, the experience of the Blitz is sort of foundational to the myth of the founding moment of social democracy in Britain. Some of you might have heard of a soap opera called EastEnders that's still going on British TV. One of its very first characters was Lou Beals, who was like the female matriarch of the central family, and she was always going on in the 1980s about the experience of the war and how in the war everybody used to muck in together. Yeah? That the experience of the Blitz had literally made Londoners part of a common community that hadn't been the case beforehand. And clearly the experience of the Blitz was ghastly, and not just in London, because although we think of London as being the only site of the Blitz, in fact Coventry in the industrial Midlands is effectively bombed out, so is Plymouth down on the border of Devon and Cornwall, and the little sort of phallic bit that drops off the end of Britain. So was less severely other industrial centres